No one? Okay. All right, let's see. Let me pull up the article and share it. Oh, just the abstract. Okay, that's fine. All right, we'll just go over it together and see what we can make of it. All right, let me share my screen. All right. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, so pediatric outcome after maternal cancer diagnosed during pregnancy. Okay, so today's session will just be a journal club. So we're just going to review the paper and see things we can learn from it so that we can apply when we're doing our own studies. Right. Just by looking at the name, what kind of designs do you think might be appropriate for just by looking at the topic, since we've not read the paper, let's just dissect it based on face value. Um, or who can first of all tell us what the paper is all about? Maybe we'll start from there. For those who read the abstract, what is it all about?
Can you raise your hand? Kenneth?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, what hair clearly, yes.
Okay, Prof, good day and good day, everyone. I looked at the abstract of the paper. The aim is to see if there's any difference in neurological performance between children born to mothers in one group that had cancer treatment when they were pregnant versus a control who do not have such a cancer treatment. And the work presented a thorough method which I really enjoy because it's aligned with my questions yesterday by using first a questionnaire and later went into the folders. Okay, so that from there they could look at some general medical condition things. So they use, I think, Bailey's scale to weigh the performance of the children, and they checked it at 18 months and 36 months. Then they showed how they excluded some participants in their pictorially. I saw how they eliminated some of the participants. They also looked at the cardiovascular aspects maybe for a reason I don't know, maybe because of cancer chemotherapy side effects. Okay, so that's just what they did in a snapshot, and they concluded that there's no significant difference in the performance between the children born to the women, the ones that have cancer and the ones that do not have cancer.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive summary. Thank you. So, what kind of study design is this from what Kenneth has explained to us? What will you say is the study design? Even if you've not read the manuscript, like what does that study design sound like to you based on what has been described? We need someone to raise their hand and explain. No takers.
Well, there's something. The responses in the chat box. Multi-center case control study, longitudinal retrospective cohort, case control study design.
Well, we
Case
need somebody to
control
raise their
study.
hand, explain and justify the answer, and receive some extra quizzing too.
Titilala.
Well, I have not gone far reading into it, but it was interesting, and I think it's a prospective study.
Okay.
It's a prospective cohort study, comparative, and
So how do you justify your answer that it's a prospective cohort? What aspects of that narrative, at least based on either what you read or what you heard from
what I read, it shows that at least mothers were followed up.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
I think they compared with mothers who didn't, they also saw children of mothers who were not previously exposed to cancers.
Okay.
And
Excellent. Please go ahead. Yes.
and they compared parameters, cognitive and some other things, which I didn't finish reading.
Okay. Excellent. Let's get other viewpoints too.
Diana.
Good evening. I think it's a case control study. And in this case, the cases are the children whose mothers had cancer, and the controls are the children whose mothers did not have cancer. And they're trying to look for the exposure, which is the cancer treatment, and then compare the outcomes among those children. Over to you.
All right. Thank you. And we'll have another perspective.
Elaine.
I think I believe that this is a prospective cohort study.
Okay. Based on what? Okay. You're breaking up badly, unfortunately.
It says pediatric outcome during pregnancy. So the cancer load, what will be the
Okay, let's have somebody else. I think he's having problems with his network.
Kenneth.
Okay, thank you for having me again. I think it is a mixed method or a kind of mixed model research that combine both a case control and a prospective, because it looked at the cancer which has already taken place as at the time of the research, and it's prospective because it followed up the offsprings at 18 and 36 months. That's my take.
Okay, let's clarify that confusion there. What we care about is this: who is the study population, right? Let's start with the PICO framework. Kenneth, while I still have you on the line, who are we interested in as our study population in this study? Is it the parents or is it the children? Or another person? Because there are two people here in this study, the women and then the children. But who really are our study population of interest?
The children.
Exactly, the children. So when we talk about prospectiveness of research, it is in relation to the study population. And also, can I just correct, we don't want to fall into the mistaken opinion that you could somehow straddle both designs. You can't have a combination. It can't be a case control. It can't be a hybrid of case control and cohort. It's one. So it can't be both, right? So we are all over, right? I think some have said it's a case control, others have said it's a cohort, but I think there's still some hands up. Ayuba, your hand has been up.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I joined well. The question is, I didn't get the question right, but I was able to understand what people are saying. My contribution is that, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a case control study because the study, the outcome of the study is the exposure. That's talking about women with cancer. So that's my little contribution and understanding. Thank you. Over.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. I think we have I think we may have a lot of confusion regarding how we determine this. So let's clarify it. What determines the prospectiveness of research is where the two things. One, when we generate the hypothesis. So let's create an image here. Let's come to this. Let me cut out a all right, let me use this as our drawing board. All right, so here we have exposure. Here we have our outcome. And here we have, this is when the hypothesis was generated. Right? So this is where the investigator was. He generated a hypothesis. We collected data on exposure, and then we'll have the data on the outcome. What design is this? This is where the hypothesis was formulated. The investigator was here. It's like, I think it's going to be very interesting if we gathered a bunch of women who received cancer treatment and those who did not receive cancer treatment. And then we'll follow them over time to see what happens to their children down the lane. We'll see this outcome and that outcome and see if it differed between the two groups of women we examined. What kind of study design will this be?
Perspective.
This will be a cross-section.
Sorry?
A cross-sectional study.
Okay. A cross-section, so it can't be a cross-section because a cross-section involves one time. We're collecting data at one single point in time. But here, remember I said, we are looking at the exposed and unexposed, and we are following them over time. Once you have follow-up over time, it's no longer cross-section. Cross-section means we take one single snapshot. It's like one single slice of bread, right? Or one single snapshot in time. That is what makes it cross-sectional, right? But here, remember I said the investigator comes here, and it's like, geez, I wonder whether there's a difference in outcomes between women who are receiving treatment for cancer versus those who are not. So he has two groups of women. He collects the data, and then he follows them over time in terms of their children and sees down the line, 18 weeks, 35 weeks, 60 weeks, whatever the timeline is, whether the outcomes differ between the children of those women. Right. So what design is this?
So I think it's a case control study.
Okay.
I think it's a case control.
A prospective cohort study.
All right.
It's a prospective cohort study. I will go with the yes.
Okay. So a perspective means what does the English word perspective means? We can look up the dictionary and tell us what perspective means so that we are all on the same page.
Looking towards the future.
Exactly. Looking towards the future, right? That's what perspective means. So when we have exposure occurring first and we follow these individuals over time to see the outcome, it's prospective. It's prospective because we start up with individuals who do not have the outcome. That is a classic if everybody has the outcome at this point, then it's no longer a prospective cohort. It's prospective, looking forward into the future, because we're looking forward into the future to see whether these individuals will develop the outcome. So this study is not a case control study, right? Funnily enough, however, even authors themselves do not know the design for their own study, right? When you look at the manuscript in paper here, they, for example, if you look at the first, let's go to the first paragraph of discussion. They said, in this multi-center prospective case control study, right? And this is in the Holy New England Journal of Medicine. What are some of just the major headaches we see in just that one single sentence? Can a case control study ever be prospective, first of all?
No.
No.
So we need somebody to raise their hand and explain clearly.
No. Hi, am I audible?
Okay, who is speaking?
Okay. Let's go with Sirat. You haven't spoken yet. Sarat.
I'm audible enough. Yes, I believe a case control study can be prospective. I'll give an example of a study I participated in. It was on malaria vaccine, and it was basically looking at some outcomes among children who are vaccinated and unvaccinated children. It was severe malaria and then meningitis. So the cases here were children who reported to the hospital with this and were diagnosed with these conditions: severe malaria, cerebral malaria, and then meningitis. So these children, after being diagnosed and discharged from the hospital, were traced to their homes to be enrolled as cases. And then 4 controls were enrolled, controls by location, 4 controls that were staying in the same community. We're looking at controls that were within at least more than 100 meters away from the case's house. So that was a recruitment arrangement that was done. So the controls were other children living in the same vicinity, and the cases were those who reported with this condition: malaria, cerebral malaria, severe malaria, and meningitis. Over.
Okay, so let's before we move on to that, let's clarify that case control studies can never be prospective. Now let's dissect the answer you gave and explain why before we go back to this. In your case, you said that you have exposure here and you have an outcome. And this time you as an investigator came here, right? This is you as the investigator now with your hypothesis. And you trace back these kids to their homes and you collected data on their exposure and on their outcomes. What kind of study design is this?
It's a case control study.
It's a retrospective study, sir.
Yeah, case controls are also retrospective, but what kind of retrospective study is this?
It's case control.
So let's be clear, right? The fact that it's retrospective does not necessarily mean it's all case control studies are retrospective, but not all retrospective studies are case controls. So I think what we are getting tripped over is that when a study is retrospective, we automatically imagine that it's a case control. So once you really put that to rest, that's wrong thinking, epidemiologic thinking. So again, all case control studies are retrospective, but not all retrospective studies are case controls, right? In this case, what kind of retrospective study is this? Sorry?
Okay.
Sorry, can we just have one person to answer?
I think it is cohort study. Retrospective.
All right. So in this case, this is a retrospective cohort study, right?
Yes.
It's a retrospective cohort study. Remember, this structure, as you can see here, the basic structure is exactly the same in both of these cases. Exposure to outcome, exposure to outcome. The only difference is where
we are not seeing what you are showing.
Oh, really?
We are seeing it.
Okay, all right.
We are seeing it. We are
Thank
seeing
you very
it.
much. Okay.
We are seeing it.
So in a prospective, remember, prospective means we are looking forward in time. The investigator is here and he comes with a hypothesis. He grabs exposed and unexposed, he follows them over time to see who develops the outcome. In a retrospective cohort, like the example the gentleman just gave now, he said individuals developed cerebral malaria and they had some treatment, right? So they had the treatment first and then they developed the outcome. They came here after the outcome had been developed, and then they traced the individuals back to their homes, and then they collected data from them, right? What the same that again in this case, they're still trying to look at what is the relationship between the exposure and the outcome. Now, in a case control study, what will have happened is this: the investigator is somewhere, so we have the outcomes have already occurred, right? The outcomes have already occurred. The investigator comes here. This is where the investigator comes now in the case control study. And they're like, geez, we have the outcomes, but we don't know which exposures led to the outcome, right? So in this case, the investigator is trying to look at, among the cases, to look at what exposures led to that, right? So you have to determine whenever you are, you're stuck, you need to know whether or not, what exactly are the investigators looking at? So in this case, if you do not know the exposure, right? Like let's go back to this case study the individual made. We have individuals with cerebral malaria, but you already mentioned that they already had treatment. So you already know at this point in time what they had. So the question here that matters is, when you come here, what do you know at this point? Do I know the outcome already? Or am I looking for the outcome? If I have already identified them clearly that these are individuals with cerebral malaria, and I also know the exposure, and I know that, oh, these guys were treated, and all I'm doing is going back to their case notes and collecting information on their treatment and also collecting information on the outcome, I already know both of this. So in this case, this is a retrospective cohort, right? Again, the hallmark of a case control study is that we start off with the outcome and we don't know the exposure. It's not as if we know what it is. We are just trying to figure out what the exposure is, right? Now let's go back to our paper that we're evaluating and why this is pretty wrong. So it cannot be a prospective case control study because you cannot mention the word case control and mention prospective in the same sentence. That is fundamentally wrong. Case control studies cannot be prospective because they're always retrospective. So the retrospective always because we already have the outcome and we're looking back in time to see what exposures may have led to the outcome, right? So that's why you cannot have, a prospective case control study. Now, also, when we look at the design, the study itself, let's go back to the abstract. So you see, they said, we compare children whose mothers received a diagnosis of cancer during the pregnancy, right? So sometimes it's very helpful to break this down with elements of PICO. So if we look at it from the framework of PICOT, then it helps us to clearly distinguish what exposure is and what the outcome is. I think that what made the investigators confused is that they actually confused what their study population was. At some point, they were imagining that their study population was the mothers, but that's not true. The study population was the children. So let's look at the elements of PICO and let's see how we can match each of them to that study. All right. So in this case, who can tell us what the population of interest is here in this study? What is the population?
The babies.
Why is it not the mothers?
Because they selected children and comparing also with children.
Which of the letters in PICO do we need to look at to tell us what the population is?
P.
Yeah, but to identify P, which other letter do we need to really look at here?
Intervention.
Okay. But in this case, right, if you look at intervention, this is where the authors got confused because they said, well, the mothers are the one receiving treatment, they're receiving an intervention. That's where they got it wrong, right? So what you should actually look at is the outcome. Among whom are you measuring the outcome? In this case, the outcomes were issues of neonatal health and general health. Among who? Is it among the parents or among the children?
Among the children.
The children, exactly. And that's how you reason to figure out what your population is, right? Otherwise, you end up imagining a completely wrong population and imagining a completely wrong study design. So here, it's very clear that our study population is the children because the outcomes have been measured among the children. And in many times in epidemiology, we might be dealing with another population. For example, I might be interested in childhood caries, and I'm asking the parent questions about the child because the child can't talk. Well, my study population is not the parents, even though I'm talking with the parents and I'm asking them questions. My study population is the people among whom I'm assessing the outcome. And in this case, as long as the outcome is being assessed among the children, it is the children that is my study population. So we don't want to mix this up. And so here we have established that the population is the children. Now, here are the clear hints that let you know that clearly this study is prospective. It says all children were prospectively assessed by means of a neurological examination at 18 months, 36 months. So you see, prospectively. So that is a clear evidence for us to know that the study we're dealing with is prospective because the elements of time is such that it is not looking backwards. If it were looking backwards, it will be a case control study or a retrospective cohort. It's looking forward. So that means it's prospective cohort. And so that's how we want to think about it. So here is how, I think I have some slides here, how we can think about it, right? So here we have the exposure. The exposure is here in terms of the what people were exposed to, and here we have the outcome. If the investigator comes here, so we're going to be moving this single slide a lot of places. So here, we said here you could have the hypothesis here. If the hypothesis is here, and we're saying, okay, we're going to collect data among the exposure and see how it results in the outcome, this becomes a prospective cohort study, right? So in this case, this is prospective because we come here with a hypothesis and we're saying we will collect data among the exposed and non-exposed. Now, if we were to make this study a retrospective cohort, or let's say a case control, since we're very interested in the idea of a case control study, who can tell us how we will have to redesign the study for it to be a case control study? If you wanted to design the study as a case control study, how will you do it? What will it sound like?
Hello, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, go
Yes,
ahead.
sir. The intervention will be at the middle. The exposure, then the intervention, then the results. The exposure, intervention, and outcome.
No, once an actual design, what will you do step by step? So forget about the image. One now actual design of a study. So what will you do? Step one. Yusuf, okay.
I think we will identify our cases, and in this case is children with neurological conditions, and then match them to the controls, and then look back if their mothers had cancer diagnosis at whatever, at maternal.
Excellent. So step one will be to identify the children who have the outcome of interest, which is neurological issues, right? That's step one. And how could we identify them? Now we're talking about practically now. How would you identify children with neurological issues? What would you do? Yes, Desaline? Okay, I think I'm having problems with your audio. Titi Lola?
Okay, I think we could observe these children, look out for mothers who have these cancers and these exposures. And
I think the first thing should be confirmation, and then we look.
Okay, can we speak one person at a time, please? All right, Titila, please continue.
Itilala.
Hello, I think we'll carry out a neurological examination on the children to know whether they are showing signs of neurological disorders.
Okay, but in a case control study, we want to find cases that have already been established and proven. We're not the ones who are trying to prove that they have neurological disease or issues. That's the hallmark of a case control study, that they've already been shown to have it. And that's where the efficiency of a case control study comes, that we already have them sitting there and we're just grabbing them. That is the that's the whole point of a case control study. So if you now have to go and say we're going to grab a bunch of kids and test them, then that is you have missed the whole point of the case control study has been missed at that point. All right. So So where will we start? We want to we're trying to make that as practical as possible. We have all agreed that we will start with children with neurological issues. But practically, how will you do that?
So we have to collect the data from the hospitals.
Okay. Thank you. Any other perspective?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And so I think by developing inclusion and exclusion criteria. So based on that, they will now select the appropriate population that were needed. Thank you.
Thank you. So can somebody give us an answer that reflects in their own community? Where will you go to find kids with neurological disease or impairments?
I think I would go to a special needs school and identify the neurological conditions, maybe like things like maybe Down syndrome, autism, like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other perspectives?
Children clinic.
Okay.
Neurological children clinic.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's the first thing you have to do, right? If you're writing a proposal or a protocol for a case control study, the first thing I want to see is how are you identifying the cases? And what I don't want to see is you saying, oh, I'm going to gather a bunch of kids and test them to see who has no. Like that you have completely missed the point of the case control study. I want you to identify clearly a facility or a center or institution where those people already have been identified to exist, right? You have an easy spot to grab the cases, right? That is extremely important. So in this case, if we were designing the study as a case control study, that is the first place we're going to start, right? But here, what was the first place instead? In this study, so for each element, we're going to contrast it with this study. So we've established that if this were a case control study, we will go to a hospital that treated individuals or children with neurological defects, and we will select our cases as those children. But here, in this study, what was the starting point instead? And I know we've mentioned this, but just to reemphasize and really drum that into us. Where did this start instead? When we contrast. Titilola.
Starting point was the mothers.
Exactly. They started with the exposure. Say, okay, this mother, have you been exposed to chemotherapy? Yes or no? Right. That's where it started from. So you can see why this is clearly not the case control study, right? Because you're starting with exposure. I would say that practically if we're designing the study as a case control study, we will have to start with the cases. In other words, the children who have the outcome. All right. Now, in our case control mode, what next will we do? We've identified the children as individuals with defects. And by the way, you want to make sure that you are very clear in your PICO. When we talk about PICO, we live and die by PICO. You have to make sure that the inclusion and exclusion criteria are very well defined. So what is it? All children of all ages, or what would you? Imagine you're just writing an NIH grant. How will it be very specific in terms of defining the boundary of the population? What would be reasonable in this case? And what would drive your decision in that regard? What considerations would you put into effect in determining what boundaries you set? Titula, is your hand up? That was an old hand.
It's an old hand.
Okay, alrighty. Okay, so let's think about this way, right? Okay, Finest, your hand is up.
I say we will consider their age.
Okay. All right, let's look at this graphically, right? This is when they were born. Do we want to be closer to their point of birth, or do we want to be farther away from their point of birth, their timing of birth, and why? Should it be, as proximal or very far from when they were born? So that's how you want to start reasoning. Diana.
Diana?
I think I want to be closer to the time of birth because my exposure of interest is the cancer treatment, the effect of cancer treatment on the children.
Okay, thank you. What happens when we go further and further away from the birth period? What are some of the, and again, we're thinking about it purely in the context of epidemiologic biases, remember? And think of it in the three biases we have: confounding bias, selection bias, and measurement bias. What happens if you choose a timing that is so far away from the point of birth? What could happen?
Adeyemi?
Okay, yeah, thank you, sir. So I believe that the farther the children are from their time of birth or their period of birth, they're exposed to other, for example, in this case, you're talking about mothers' exposure to cancer. So I believe the children can be exposed to other teratogens and some of the other things that would inflate what you're trying to measure in them. And it's not be a maternal thing again, to be more of environmental exposure to carcinogens or teratogens.
Excellent. Very excellent point, right? So maybe they live in a house that has, they've lived forever in a house with lead paint, maybe they're drinking all manner of contaminated water that has clear impact on the child's, cognitive development. Now we're instead of dealing with one issue, we're dealing with 1 million issues now, right? So the further down the road you go, you have confounding influences now that say, oh wow. Instead of it's a lot of noise now in what we're trying to measure. But so that addresses issues of confounding. But from the perspective of measurement bias, what concerns do we have the further away we go? Remember that measurement bias has to do with misclassification. Okay, Kenneth, go ahead, please.
Kenneth, please unmute yourself. Okay. We'll try Titilola again.
The challenge for me will be time to develop some of these disorders. We don't know how soon the babies would naturally develop symptoms and signs of neurological disorders.
Okay.
So if we are too far and there is no strict follow-up from birth, that would be a challenge.
Excellent. So you don't want to be too far so that you have all issues of confounding, but you don't want it to be too near where you can actually see the symptoms, right? So you need to be just right at the right spot. Now, if it's too far, another issue is the issue of misclassification. Because remember, the person you're going to be asking is the mother. If the treatment or the exposure was something that relies purely on memory, well, people forget things. The farther away you go, they're like, I can't remember whether I received that treatment. They start to forget. So that's one of the practical considerations that you want to pay attention to. So in this case, you want to consult with experts. You want to talk to a pediatrician, you want to talk to somebody who knows that field to say, well, Mr. Expert, at what point do you recommend that we can, sample cases and be fairly guaranteed that we'll see the symptoms, right? And it is based on those considerations that you will then define what your criteria are. So is that an old hand or a new hand? Okay. All right, so let's say that based on this, we're told by our expert that, well, we should sample kids between, 1 to 5 years old, just making up the numbers. So now we have finished everything about our cases, right? Now we have to figure out our controls. So who would our controls be if this were a case control study? Now, bear in mind that we've clearly established that what these people did here is not a case, never mind what they called it. This is wrong,
My
right?
hand is up.
Okay.
Yeah, the controls will be children born at that same time without neurological issues.
Okay. Thank you. How will you verify? There are two parts of your answer there. Children born at the same time. So that means that you're matching on what? In your selection of controls, you're matching based.
No, I mean, yes. If we are taking children at, let's say, 2 weeks of life, 1 week of life, anytime. So we'll look at children around that age bracket too, that do not have the neurological condition.
Okay. All right, let's put it practical now so that it's all practical. So you've identified a case, we're going to call him Miss A, right? A female who is, let's say, 3 years old and has the outcome of interest. Practically, so what are you going to do now? And you want to select controls for that case. Practically, what are you going to do next? 3-year-old child, female, that has neurological disease. What are you doing now?
I think we should look for about 4 cases of the same age that from mothers who are unlikely to have had cancer. the location must be distant.
Okay.
Maybe we go to a well clinic and look at their children. Maybe children who are well, but who have nothing to do with cancer, or maybe would we pick them from immunization, something routine that
can
now stimulate wellness.
Part of your answer was very illuminating, but part of your answer put us into a very, very deep hole. Do you know which one put us into a very deep hole?
I don't know, please.
Okay. Remember that we said that when we are selection of controls must be done independent of exposure. Do you remember that phrase yesterday?
Yes, please, I do.
Yeah. Is there any part of your answer that you think violates that principle fundamentally?
Okay. I said it should be far away.
You said we should try to look for kids whose mothers do not have cancer.
Yes.
Yeah, but in that case, remember now that if you have cancer, you're going to receive chemotherapy. But now it means that you're not sampling in a manner that is independent of the exposure. In fact, your sampling of selection of controls is predicated on the exposure now. So that's a problem for us now, right? Do you understand why?
So it wouldn't matter if their parents had cancer before. That was just saying.
Yeah, you have to close your eyes to their exposure status. That is what we are trying to find in the study. The whole point of a case control study is to see, all right, this is a control. Now, I wonder what was different between the controls and the case. Then we can say, the mother was, the mother received cancer. Oh, I see. Then we're getting narrow and closer to the answer.
Okay, or despite the cancer, something did not happen.
So yeah, so our selection of controls must be done in a way that is completely independent of the exposure. That is a fundamental principle in the design of case control studies.
Thank you.
So now, but thank you very much. But before we do this, right, we have to write down what our matching variable. Where's my eraser? All right. So before we start matching and all of those things, you have to write it down. You have to take a piece of paper. That's why you must write a proposal, your protocol first before doing anything. So what are we matching on? What are our matching variables in this study? It's so hard to write with this thing. All right. So what are matching variables?
Age is the matching variable.
Sorry?
Age is the matching variable.
Okay, age, exactly. So age. And what else? What else will be reasonable to match on?
Because age may be a confounding variable.
Yeah, we've agreed with you that age is fine. We're just saying.
What of facility of delivery?
Okay, if you want to match on facility of delivery, what might you be guilty of now?
Overmatching.
Yeah, you might easily be, because now for every case you find, you have to find a control. Now, in this kind of case, maybe facility of delivery may not be hard, right? But the more and more extra factors you pull in, remember that you won't be able to. But in this case, facility might be fine, because maybe there is, we have a facility there that, that we can easily select controls from. But be aware also that another downside of matching on too many variables is, note that once you match on a variable, you can't see that variable in your regression anymore. You see, when we fit regression models and we have age and sex and whatever, matching on a variable means that you won't be able to explore that factor any further, right? But so to keep it simple, let's say we want to match here on age, and let's say we want to match on gender. That simply means that for this case where we have found a case, let's call her Aishat, who is 3 years old, and she's female, we will say, since we're matching on, let's say, the age, the gender, and maybe let's not say facility, that's just too narrow. Let's just say the same community, right? Let's take it a bit further out and say community. It means we have to find another child that is also similar age, same gender, and of that same community. That's what we mean by matching. Now, when we're matching on age, does that mean that the control has to be exactly 3 years old? Since Aisha is 3 years old, is that practical, or what will you do separately?
Yusuf? You can unmute.
I think it is difficult to obtain the same age of cases and controls. Therefore, we should use plus or minus 3 or 5.
Okay, thank you. That's one option. What do we call that kind of matching? When we're not looking for the exact value of age, but we say, oh, plus or minus. What do we call that?
This group
interval.
We call it caliper matching.
Okay, caliper matching.
Yeah, so it means that in this case, it's not an exact value of age, but we're like, okay, so if Aisha is 3 years old, we can take somebody who's 5 years old, right? And that's just because right from the word go, case control studies are supposed to help us with efficiency. It's no longer efficient if we have to go and spend all the money in the world to look for one guy that's exactly 3 years old. Well, that's no longer efficient, right? So we match. So for Aisha, whom we've identified as a case, we're going to make sure that we select controls. Now, remember, we said the controls have to be free of the disease. How are you going to ensure that they are free of the disease? Practically now. What are you going to do?
Can I go? Can I try?
Sure, go ahead.
I think cases and controls should be confirmed by laboratory to prevent bias.
Okay, thank you. So yes, that's one of the ways we can go about it, right? Aisha saw a pediatrician who examined her, or a doctor whose expertise in that area, right? Then the controls, when we find a control, we want to make sure also that they apply the exact same thing, right? When doing this, one very key bias we want to be aware of is what we call ascertainment bias. What is ascertainment bias? And how do you mitigate it during this kind of design? Just from the name, even if you don't understand the epidemiologic basis of it, what does this sound like it is? Ascertainment bias. What does this sound like it could into?
Classifying cases as controls and controls as cases.
That's misclassification. But what is ascertainment bias itself? Musa, your hand has been up for a while. Is that an old hand or a new hand?
I think it is a type of bias. Instead of confirming the exact case, maybe it can confirm another name of, for example, if it is TB, but it may be diagnosed as pneumonia or other like.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to somebody else. Diana?
I think it's using different criteria to identify your cases and controls.
Excellent, right? The way you ascertain, as the name implies, the way we're ascertaining something in one group is different from the way we are doing it to another group, right? So, can someone give us an example of how this could play out in this case, for example? How could ascertainment bias easily rear its head in this case study we're looking at? Based on what Diana has explained to us well eloquently, that ascertainment bias is, how could it manifest in a study like this? Okay, Boaz, your hand is up.
Can I try?
We have a hand up.
I think we can use a standardized tool. If there's a standardized tool for ascertaining the condition in the controls, you use the same in the cases.
Okay, but in this case, we're talking practically now, right? We're talking the example we're giving, the individuals with neurological disease. So we want to make it as practical as possible. Yes, Finest, your hand is up.
Yes, we make sure it's this. Hello, we make sure it's in the same facility that have been examined and the same pediatrician, something like that.
Okay. Well, it doesn't have to be the exact same pediatrician, but you want to make sure that the doctors are all blinded. You're not telling them that here's the most common mistake that people make when they designing studies of this nature. They send a patient to the doctor to examine, and they say, "Oh, here's a case from the study," or "Here's a control from the study." What big problem have you just given us in this study now? Remember you are sending a patient to the doctor for referral, and you put a note on the patient's document and say, "Hey, this is a case from our study," or "This is a control." What shocking error have you just made in that study by just doing that? Yes, Lola.
Will there be bias?
How?
Because you are not even allowing the doctor to make up his mind.
Excellent, right? When you tell the doctor, "Oh, this is the case," or let's say you just tell him this is the control, what do you think is their natural reaction?
No work done.
No work done. They're just going to say, "Oh, patient healthy, no symptoms." And then when you tell them it's the case, oh, they're going to now start looking at probing these guys out, like all the million tests in this world. Now, what you've just done is introduce ascertainment bias, because you have, in your own study, you have created mechanisms that ensure that cases and controls are evaluated completely differently. And then, of course, you're going to see differences, but those differences arose from the fact that you did not introduce proper protocols. Another way is to have a system where you don't calibrate the doctors. So maybe on your team, you have people with different skills. Obviously, the way a neurologist will examine the patient in this our case study is quite different from the way maybe a family doctor or another healthcare provider. So if you want to make sure that the differences that arise in measurements are not because of differences in the providers, right, but reflect actual differences. So one thing we do in all studies is to standardize and calibrate examiners. We train them. So first of all, everybody's trained equally for the same period of time. And then we make them do certain procedures, right? And then the calibrator would then repeat those examinations and make sure that they get the exact same thing, right? So you want to make sure you reduce calibration, ascertainment bias by examining the doctors or whoever will be validating this diagnosis, standardizing them, calibrating them, and please, whatever you do, don't inject bias into your own study by unmasking the identity. Of course, it's an observational study, and it's quite hard for outcomes like this to blind the doctors between who is a case and who is a control. But don't add petrol to the fire, okay? Don't write things like, "Oh, this is a case," or "Oh, this is a control." Right. So far we've identified our cases. We've indicated how we're going to examine the cases and confirm the diagnosis. We've also established how we're going to select controls and how we're going to verify that they're actually controls, right? So what next at this point? So we said we're going to select, somebody mentioned 4 controls per cases. Again, why do we have that number? Why are we not going 1-to-1? If you go back to our study here, you see here that, let's see, now where did I see this now? Control F, 1-to-1. This is right here. So this is how, in cohort studies in general, again, we the problems of case control studies are quite different from problems of cohort studies, especially of prospective nature. So those issues we mentioned yesterday, like issues of discordant pairs and all, those are special problems with case control, right? So this is how you know you're even dealing with the prospective cohort. This kind of one-to-one matching is very common in prospective. Why will it be a dangerous, not dangerous, maybe I'm being too dramatic, but why will it not be recommended for you to go with a one-to-one matching for case controls? This is a recap. This is a recap of what we covered yesterday. Why will it be statistically not recommended for you to go with the one-to-one ratio for that is for iSharp came and you select just one single control? Why will that not be recommended? Yes, Diana.
I think when you have few controls, the power of the study reduces. So we want to match so that we increase the power of the study.
Okay, thank you very much. And Onwusulu. Okay.
Daniel.
The risk of concordance will be very high.
Excellent.
So that's why.
Excellent. And we want to avoid that because imagine how, just imagine how much effort you went through to identify one single case. You went to the hospital, you got ethics review approval, you got this guy, the doctors examined. All of this work just for you to end up with a concordant pair. That is just a very hostile joke. You don't want that to happen, obviously. So that's why it will take a very brave researcher to do a one-to-one matching. In a case control study, it's either you are either very brave or very naive, or maybe a little bit of both. Because like the fear of having concordant pairs should keep you up at night to say, no, we will sample, like at least 2-to-1, or I recommended 4-to-1. That makes sure that you maintain precision in your analysis. All right, so that's what makes a case control study. We always want to make sure we keep that ratio to ensure that we have power and also prevent concordant pairs. So we've identified our cases now, we've identified our controls. Now we can now collect data on exposures, right? These are children. Remember, our study we said will be for children ages maybe 1 to 5, who are providing the data. Where are we going to get information about exposures from in this case? Because now, remember, we have cases, we have controls, and now we want to collect information on, did their exposure differ, right? Where are you going to get exposure data from? And remember now also that in the case control studies, you have a well-defined outcome, but case control studies are especially suited for multiple exposures, right? Because you don't know what could explain the difference. It could be this, it could be that, it could be, sure, at this point, you don't even know that it's the cancer treatment, right? For their mothers, you don't know that at all. So you are thinking of every single thing under the sun. And this is why we need case control studies. This is why in the field, in epidemiology, when we have outbreaks, this is why they are so popular. Because you have an outcome, but you don't know what caused it. You have 1 million candidates and you want to rule them out, right? And generally, when we're ruling out, we never look at p-values, by the way, in the actual field, because you could never reach statistical power as a follow-up on what we discussed yesterday, right? But you're just looking at the direction of the association. So bottom line is that when we are designing a case control study, we want to pay very careful attention to how and where we're going to collect the data for exposures. The fact that it is observational doesn't mean it must be self-reported. I think sometimes people mistaken that, oh, it's observational study, so it has to be self-reported. No, where we can find objective data, we're going to use it, right? But if we cannot find objective data, then we rely on self-reports. That it's a norm to include both where we can. We include elements of self-reported information, and we also include objective data. Now, in this case study, where could we find objective data, for example? What kinds of objective data could we access for both the cases and the controls? Yes, Finance?
You can check the past record of the investigation done to the mothers, like MRI or other lab investigations.
But you have the benefit of having read the paper now, you know it's the mothers. But if this was a live investigation, would you necessarily know that it has anything to do with the mothers?
Okay.
Like forget that you read the paper, right? Imagine that you're in the field and you were deployed to go and do an investigation of children with neurological deficits. Where should your mind be exploring at this point? What kind of things should you be thinking about at this point? Because remember that we use a case control because we can explore multiple exposures. In this case study, what should you be thinking of? Sure, of course, you should be thinking of mothers, of course, but what else should you be thinking about?
The signs and symptoms they are exhibiting at that material time.
Okay, but remember we're talking about things that are common to both cases and controls. The controls don't have symptoms, right? So you're looking for common exposure. So apart from mothers, what should you be thinking of? Yeah, Demi.
Like vaccination records, both the ones with the outcomes and one without the outcomes will have been vaccinated. So maybe there might be some vaccinations that maybe were not received in the ones that had the outcomes versus those that, or something like that.
Excellent.
Then
so you're looking at
also history of okay.
What? Please go ahead.
Also history of like trauma to the child, history of maybe neonatal admissions, for example, like some other things like that.
Excellent. What about environmental exposures? Will you not be thinking of environmental exposures? Yes, Giwa.
Okay, I think what will come to my mind first would have been environmental issue, maybe exposure to toxins, any even food. I will also think about the food, possibly what the mother was, feeding on, and maybe some other things like infection. It's possible maybe the person was exposed to any form of infection. Food, when I mean food, I mean maybe all this lead, metals, anything could cause any of this neurological abnormality in children.
Excellent.
That would have been my thoughts, actually.
All right, awesome, thank you. So the moral of the story is that when you design a case control study, you don't just lazily come up with a list, one or two things. You have come with a long list of things. That is why we do case control studies. Like obviously you've read the manuscript now, and so you have the benefit of foreknowledge of saying, oh, it's a mother's issues. No. But at the time of the investigation, you don't know anything. And that is why you're using a case control study, because it's great when we have an outcome and multiple exposures. And we're just trying to figure out what in the world is happening. That's why we call it an investigation. It's called an investigation because you don't know. If you knew, well, we wouldn't be there, would we? So you've been deployed to answer a very specific question and help this community with the outbreak. So you have to figure out why it's happening. And that's the power of case control studies, right? You have an outcome and you have anything under the sun that could have caused it. And then you make sure you collect detailed information on each of the exposures. So in your final data set, your data set will be something like this. Yesterday, we talked about how to set up the survey on the platform, the Chisquares platform. But this is what your final data set would look like. You will have like, an indicator for whether they're a case or a control. You have data for variables like gender, age, and then you have your possible your suspects, right? Is it smoking? Is it lead? Is it whatever, right? Each of them, yes or no, where they were exposed, right? Very important here, this indicator here, this column. Remember, we talked about very important variables that you have to collect yesterday. Case status indicator, whether it's yes or no. Let's go back to our questionnaire from yesterday to map to each of those things. So I can't count the number of times I've seen questionnaires designed for case control and like, okay, clearly you do not know what you're trying to achieve because none of the important variables that we need for case control studies are there. So remember that when you're analyzing the case control study, you will have to have something like this. So let's map back to the analysis. So if you are doing a analysis for a case control study, what you need is a conditional logistic regression analysis, where you select the outcome, which is the exposure of interest, for example, lead or smoking. Then you indicate the variable that is a group identifier. This is very important, right? This is the variable we're setting up yesterday that we said the case ID, then the individuals will indicate whether the controls are part of that matched set, right? So this is extremely important. This is what tells us that a particular case and controls are belong to the same group. So you must be able to create your questionnaire in such a way that you capture this. Any small typo means that the analysis will be wrong. Imagine you had, because you are doing copy and paste, you had A1. Well, A space 1 is not the same thing as A1, right? So this is why you want to give very careful attention to your questionnaire design. So let's go back to our questionnaire from yesterday, if I can find it. I think it was this one yesterday. So we had year of publication. Is this a case or control? This question corresponds to this, right? Is this a case or a control? That's what corresponds to. And then we have the unique ID of case. So when the case will create a unique ID that identifies the case. And then we have, please select which case this control is matched to. So if you remember from yesterday, we selected a dynamic response such that once we have imputed the value of a unique ID of the case, we can then select the controls to which, for each control, we can match the control to a particular case, right? So when you're setting up your questionnaire, you should have in mind how it's going to be analyzed. If you end up with a questionnaire for data collection for a case control study that does not have this, then how are you going to analyze data? You've already shot yourself in the foot, right? So you want to make sure that minimum you have this, and then you have the exposure variables, obviously. So that's very important. So you have to be very meticulous when designing case control studies to make sure that data collection is fit for use and fit for purpose. Because then what the software is doing is telling us is that all of these individuals are treated as the same cluster. That's why we call it a conditional logistic regression, because this is treated as a separate condition or a separate stratum. And these individuals are treated as a separate stratum also, because this is the case and these are the controls. In each stratum, you can only have one case, and then you can have as many controls as you matched to that case, right? So it's very important when you're collecting data for case control studies to use the appropriate tool, right? Not all tools obviously have the ability to allow you collect data for specific design. So using the appropriate tool is extremely important, and I cannot emphasize enough. Now let's go back to our paper that we're reviewing, if I can find it again. All right. Now let's look at this. So bottom line, this was not a prospective cohort or a prospective case control study, as the authors mentioned. And of course, epidemiologists are extremely petty. I think these are the most petty people in this world. After this paper was published, some epidemiologists wrote to the editor and said, "Dear editor, this study has a lot of flaws. Despite the importance of this study, we are concerned about some basic, whenever an epidemiologist uses the word basic methodological flaw, that's like a serious shade. It's like, oh, this is so basic that we're so shocked that you didn't even know this." So they said they are concerned about some basic methodological flaws. One of this is, although the study is presented as a prospective case control study, it is in fact a cohort study, where children were enrolled and followed on the basis of their exposure. That is, according to whether or not their mothers had received a diagnosis of cancer. Right. So it is a prospective cohort. They also said that finally, the study was not powered to draw a statistical inference regarding the observed difference between the percentage of children who were small for gestational age in the prenatal exposure group and the percentage of children who were small in the control group. They said the number of children needed to reach statistical significance is 964. However, that in the paper, the number of children was 129 plus 129. That's approximately 260. So that here, instead of 260, they have, instead of 960 something, they have 200 something. And that's why most of the results are not significant. So first of all, let's dissect that. What do we call a scenario where maybe you needed 964 people, but you ended up with, let's say, 260, and therefore you could not detect the difference? What do we call that? What kind of error is that? Yes, Diana?
Oh. I think it's a type 2 error of where you fail to reject the null hypothesis because your sample size is small.
Excellent. So it's a type 2 statistical error. So in this letter to the editor, the writers say, well, there are many problems with this study. One, the authors don't seem to have a basic understanding of epidemiology 101, and they're confusing a classic prospective cohort with a case control study. Number two, that the study is underpowered. What criticism do you have for this letter? The basis for the authors saying the study is underpowered is they said they looked at the prevalence estimates reported from the study and said, based on this, right? Based on this, we think that is so. Let's first of all see how these people calculated the number, right? These numbers came from the study we just reviewed. So what they did was they pulled up so let's just look at how they calculated it. And then let's now critique that approach or that kind of thinking. They came to sample size and calculated for a comparative study with 2 arms, percentage as outcome. This is a prospective cohort. So they're saying that if you're going to do a prospective cohort study and the prevalence of the outcome among the non-exposed or control group is 15%, and the prevalence of outcome among the exposed is 22%. If we had a two-sided test and a power, on average, most researchers use a power of 80%, with a 1-to-1 ratio, let's assume a response rate of 100%, then you will need 484 people in each group, right? 968 people in the study overall. This is how they got this number, 964. This is rounding issue. So Now, what's the major flaw with this kind of approach or this kind of thinking, where because what the problem here is this, right? You have gotten the numbers from the study, and now you are calculating sample size based on the numbers from the study and saying they needed to have had 964 people. What's the problem with that from an epidemiologic lens? Yes, Adeyemi.
Well, the parameter they used is also from the study that already had a methodological flaw. So I believe that the calculations are already inherently wrong.
Yeah, excellent. So you don't, it's like saying, oh, okay, I have to bake a cake for a wedding. Now, what I should have done is I should have gotten the wedding list from the people getting married. I should have planned in advance, and then I bake just the right amount of cake for people. But what do I do? I wait until the people come, and then I say, oh, we will have needed a cake this big based on the numbers we've had. That's circular reasoning, all right? But the major problem is that we cannot evaluate epidemiology or statistics based on the outcomes, but it has to be based on hypotheses that are calculated or derived ahead of time based on population statistics. Remember that we always have two things we worry about in epidemiology or statistics. We have the population and we have the sample. So population and sample. Yeah, Enoch, you have your hand up. You want to say something?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well, yes.
Yeah, so is there any value in doing this post hoc analysis of sample size because it's a common thing to be asked during defense, like, why did you fail to maybe conclude on this hypothesis? And you would say maybe it was underpowered, and this is the approach we would use. So is there any value in that?
It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. That's something so this is when we should have written a letter to the editor on this letter to the editor. Right. I'm just right. But it is dangerous because we calculate things in epidemiology and statistics based on population characteristics, not based on sample characteristics, right? We are optimizing population parameters, not sample, not observed results from the sample. So when so let's go back to the analogy of the wedding cake we were talking about. I just guess instead of doing my homework of getting the list of attendees and planning for the cake sufficiently, I just come to the wedding very lazily and say, oh well, geez, we needed a cake for 200 people. The problem is that I have completely ignored the concept of variability. If in this sample, it just happened to be 200. Now, here I am now telling people that, the cake, you should always plan for 200. But it is a problem of variability because tomorrow it may be 300, all right? If you had factored in the population parameters, you will have known that, well, you have to adjust for some degree of variance. That's why when we're calculating sample size, we have things like, where is it? We have, if it's, for example, if we're doing, for example, cross-sectional study, right? We have things like margin of error. We have, if it's for a continuous outcome, we have things like standard deviation, right? Those things are trying to optimize for population parameters. So we don't want to wait until the guests come to the wedding and say, oh, well, what we needed was a cake for 100 people. No, that's the wrong way of doing it. It's also like gaming the system, right? But having said that, the authors should. So if you want to calculate sample size, it should not be based on the numbers that these guys reported. You should go back to the hypothesis and say, if we wanted to take this X number of difference, what number would we need? Not just taking a number from that study and then using it to say, oh, the study is wrong. That doesn't make sense much. All right. So the moral of the story is that we want to calculate sample size properly for our studies. We want to make sure that we optimize for, we look out for bad things that could happen. The bad things that could happen could include, having concordant pairs. That's a nightmare when we're calculating sample size. So think carefully about that. Make sure that you are describing the right design, right? Like we said, there's no such thing as a prospective case control study. That does not exist. That's completely made up, right? So you have to know the right design and optimize for it accordingly. All right, we're going to stop there and see if there are any questions from anybody.
Thank you very much, Prof. We will now post the attendance register. Please look out for it. Yeah, on the chat box. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Any questions? Could you share with us the methodological flow document?
The methodological what?
Document.
I'm not sure what that means. Is it manuscript?
Neba, maybe you can clarify. In the meantime, I'll take questions from Halima.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Please, sir, I don't understand. How do we detect if a study is powered enough to detect a significance? What are we to factor into play to be able to say that, okay, this sample is well powered?
Okay. So you have
That's my first question. Sorry, sir, I have two questions.
Yeah,
Then
sure.
secondly, you said that for case control study that we need to do a conditional regression. I read somewhere that we do conditional regression when the case and controls are paired individually. That's when we have a group pairing, a group matching, that there is no need for conditional regression, that a standard, unconditional regression is still okay in that case. What would you say about this, sir? Thank you.
All right, thanks. That's very good questions. So let me answer the second one first because I will easily forget. So this is the scenario we talked about, where you have individuals matched to controls matched to a case, right? You're going to have a variable like this. So in this case, the problem we're saying is that, because we need to first of all understand the philosophical issues at play. Philosophical issues here is that individuals rows number 3, 4, and 5 were matched to row number 1 based on some characteristic, right? So it is not acceptable to imagine that these rows are independent of each other. When we do any routine analysis, so if you have an analysis like a standard logistic regression, so let's go to standard logistic regression here, if I can find it. So in that case, if my regression analysis was just regular logistic regression, there's no variable for me to select matching ID, right? And why? Because the individuals are not matched to each other. So there's no assumption that there is correlation between the observations. So yes, you're absolutely right. So in this case, where we have matching of individuals to or controls to a case, then we have to account for the correlation that is introduced by that matching, right? So what is happening in the background is that the system will analyze each of these as completely different mini data sets, as different strata, and then you have the averaging of the results across the different strata. Now, what the second scenario you described was one where we had an unmatched case control study. So in other words, when we find a case, in that case, we've not provided any matching criteria. And that simply means that when we find a case, we just identify another control without worrying about I-SHAT is female, I-SHAT is 3 to 5. On match case control studies, all we do is specify our inclusion criteria, and that applies to both cases and controls. We say, for example, that the individual must be 3 to 5 years old, and they can be of any gender, and so on and so forth, right? So that means that if we identify I-SHAT as a case, we are not specifying what condition the control must be. We're just saying we're going to pick any individual who meets the inclusion criteria, regardless of where they live, regardless of the gender they are, and regardless of whatever, right? So in that case, there's no clustering between the individuals, right? This variable is not needed, and in that kind of case, a standard logistic regression will work just fine. So you'll have to know when you are doing a matched case control study, that's on a matched case control study. Of course, the matched case control study is by far the most common. So that's why we focused on that. Now, back to your question about how do you determine the adequate power for your study? Well, when you're doing your study design, you have to calculate sample size. And let's say for a case control study, which is a comparative study with two arms, what you need to worry about here, one, is the test one or two-sided? You want to make sure that you select a two-sided test, right? Because it's more powerful. And if you can, you want to set the power at 90. The power of a study is its ability to detect differences if they exist, right? So if a study you calculate with power of 90% is more powerful than one at 80%, than one at 70%. You should absolutely not calculate power under 70% for whatever reason, because at that point it becomes unethical. Why are you subjecting people to the harms of a study when you're not even sure that you can detect differences between the groups? That becomes unethical at that point. So traditionally people use 80% because that is a fine balance between ideal versus practical. But when you can, use 90. And then lastly, another very important thing that will determine the sample size is the effect size. The effect size simply means how big of a difference do we want to see. The smaller the difference you want to detect, the larger the sample size you're going to need. But overall, so pay very close attention to your effect size to ideally always use a two-sided test. And then if you can, use power of 90. If you can't, use power of 80. And that should, you should be fine in that context. All right, any other questions?
Yes, Prof. They are asking about confidence intervals, odds ratios, and just the analysis of case control studies. Will that still happen?
Yes, we'll have that. Okay. Okay, I'll just post a short video and then I will share that. I thought it might be more interesting to look at the paper as opposed to, but I guess you guys really want so I will just post a short video and share that. Or better yet, I'll give you a homework. So you guys can, the platform writes out the results for you, but it will be good practice for you to get a data set. So what I will do is get a data set like this, create some, the homework will be two parts. One part is for you to actually design a questionnaire that involves case control studies, because you should be able to do both things, set up a questionnaire and analyze data as well. So we'll have a homework that involves both parts so you can practice.
Thank you. Was the manuscript finally retracted?
No, retraction is not retraction is a very serious thing. We don't retract papers that easily. They, however, responded. Let's look at the response that they made. The author's reply. Okay, that's down here. Okay, they said first the children in the prenatal exposure group and those in the control group were individually matched. That's a very weak answer. The fact that it's matched doesn't make it a case control study. I think that's a big problem people have. When they hear the word match, they just imagine that is a case control study. We can match in cohort studies too. So matching is not a special property of case control studies. So let's get that clear. However, we agree that strictly speaking, I'm like, well, there's nothing like strictly speaking. There's no other way you can speak about this. However, we agree that strictly speaking, our design is a cohort study since the children in both groups were prospectively followed during early childhood. And on and on, right? So they just said, well, sorry, we're wrong, but generally, yeah, you should not be caught making this kind of mistakes. These are, well, as the people wrote, these are basic issues that every one of us in the audience here should know. They are the foundations of research. And so, yes, it's kind of embarrassing when you make that kind of flaw at this kind of journal, New England Journal. And I don't even blame the authors only. I blame, like, there were peer reviewers, there was the editor, right? There's so many, it's just a failure of epidemiology, of basic epidemiology on so many levels. So it's not just the problem with the authors.
All right. Thank you, Prof. John?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Very grateful. John from Ghana. Prof, the initial question that you were answering, so imagine that you have 1:4 matching, and over your period of data collection, still you have not been able to get controls for some of the cases. What will you do? Will you analyze like that or you drop it? Thank you. And what will you recommend?
So if you have, it's not, so the fact that you're doing 1:4 matching doesn't mean that every single case will have 4, right? So if you look at this mock data set I have here, this one case has 3, this one case has 4, this one has 2, right? So it's, it is what it is. So it's not a must that all of them must have the exact same. That doesn't happen in the real world. So do what you can, of course you have a standard, you say we're going to match up to 4 controls per case, but you end up with some controls, some cases that only have 1, that's fine. What you want to avoid is cases without controls. Because remember, a case without control is not going to be used in analysis. It's just such a waste, right? So it becomes extremely inefficient. So try as much as possible to find a control for each case. Because remember, when you're calculating sample size, it was based on that. The assumption, obviously, is that you're going to have a control for each case. And so if you don't have controls for each cases, now we're now getting into the domain of unethical science. Because the question then arises again, why are you subjecting all these people to all this stress when you know you cannot detect differences between cases and controls? Because the study is underpowered. So the burden is now on you to make sure that you find a control for each case.
Thank you. What is the 1:1 ratio in terms of sample collection?
It means for one case, we select one control, or for one exposed, we select one non-exposed.
If one is working on evaluation of biomarkers of erectile dysfunction of type 2 diabetes patients, what is the study design?
We answered this yesterday. We said we cannot answer issues of study design just by looking at the title of your paper. Any title can be answered with any design. You, the investigator, will have to sit down and figure out what resources you have available to you, what you want to achieve. So it's not something we can just say, hey, from a title, this is the study design. You will have to sit down and figure that part out.
Thanks, Titilala.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. If we say that 1:1 is not good enough, I know that in the past, I've had calls to use age-matched controls, either because fund was not available or resources, whereby I've had to group patients and then maybe use one control to managing patients, and what do you feel? What do you feel about that? And
okay, so to be clear, it's not that we're saying it's bad. It's fine. You know, one-to-one is fine. We're just saying that there's a risk that you end up with concordant pairs.
Okay.
And when you end up with concordant pairs, that pair it's not used in analysis.
Okay, sir.
So you end up with like, okay, so again, you now end up in a territory where you went through all of this work just to find the result, just to fall prey to type 2 error.
Okay, but we did some studies, but maybe because they were genetic studies, and then my collaborators then felt that we didn't use controls. You know, we're looking into the genetics of sickle cell disease and the like, and some comorbidities and the like, and we didn't use control. So, how would you rate such studies so that if one has to do them in future? Because I know that what I learned in my basic epidemiology is no control, no studies, no control, no conclusion. But as I grew older, I was able to participate in those studies where we looked at hemoglobin F and we're looking at some comorbidities, prototypes, and things in sickle cell, and we did not use controls.
Yes, you can. So that is the wrong conclusion that no controls, no conclusion. That's not true epidemiologically, right?
Okay. It's many years back too.
Yeah. If you have just cases, that's what we call a case series.
Case series. Okay.
You have a bunch of cases, like individuals with sickle cell. That's all you have in your data set, and you're saying, oh, what symptoms do they have? What percentage have the symptom? That's what we call a case series. Obviously, case series is an extremely important study design in epidemiology. That we use case series to make a lot of conclusions about many important things. So yes, you can still use a case series to have useful inferences. Of course, this falls under the terrain of descriptive epidemiology because you don't have a comparative arm, but it's still very useful in epidemiology.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Oh, great.
Prof, can the platform do proofreading in order to identify basic flaws? Can you hear me? Just went silent. Is it my network or Prof's? Prof, can you hear me? Okay, so it is Prof's network. Ilya, please confirm. Is it my network or Prof's?
Yes, Lily, I can hear you clearly. I think Prof network, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thanks. So, Prof Boaz, to answer your question, so when you use the Chisquares platform, chances of making such basic mistakes are very minimal because when you use the analysis suggester, it does help you minimize all those basic mistakes. However, you still have to know the basics. I think that's why we're having these sessions, so that even if you do make a mistake, you should be able to see that there's something you've done wrong. You're able to, sorry, I'm seeing Prof's. Okay, Prof is connecting. You're able to also use it as a reviewer type of thing. So if you've already written your manuscript, right? Then you're able to. Prof usually shows people how to do it. So maybe when he comes back and shares his screen, he can do it. He can show us how to use the platform as a reviewer, because then that way you can also be able to see or improve what you've already written if you've already written your manuscript. But basically, if you use the Chisquares platform from the word go, you're not likely to make basic mistakes, because the platform is designed for people who don't know much about research. So in that way, it helps prevent such issues like the one that we saw today, from analysis to even selecting your study type. Okay, I'm gonna read other questions, see what we can answer. Yes, you're able to review the lectures afterwards. We have the YouTube channel where we have all the sessions available, all previous sessions from last year or year before last. So we've had quite a lot. You're able to find those there. Welcome back, Prof.
Thank you very much. Did you kick me out?
Yes, I wanted to take over.
Okay, that's
I
good.
thought you would.
Sorry, I had some connection issues.
Thanks. Prof, can you show us how to use the platform as a reviewer? Well, not
Okay.
yeah.
Not now. Yes, I will show you.
Okay.
Maybe in the last session.
Okay. All right. So, boys, you'll see that next time.
Exactly. Yes.
Prof. Okay. Looking at the other question. Yeah. If the control must not look like the cases in terms of sharing common exposures, how do we prevent this while achieving a good match?
So to be clear, we're not saying that the controls must not look like cases. We're not saying that you should not intentionally. We're saying that selection of controls should be, you should act like a blind person when you are selecting controls as far as exposure status. So your goal is not to make them look. So in this case, let's double down on the example we're looking at. You wouldn't go to, let's say you suspect, of course, even when you're doing a case control study and you have a gazillion exposures, you have a primary suspicion. You suspect that this is what I'm looking for. So you wouldn't select controls in a manner that somehow the exposure might be shared or might be so different. So for example, that's why we were saying earlier that the recommendation by one of our investigators would land us into trouble, because the suggestion was like, let's select controls in a way that these individuals never had, to make sure they were people who did not have cancer. I can't remember how it was framed, right? But that way, we are making sure that the risk of individuals getting the exposure is almost zero. Remember that the controls are the most people who also are at risk for developing the outcome. So if we now went out of our way to make sure that there are individuals whose parents never had cancer, that means that they were never at risk of developing the outcome in the first place or getting that exposure. It means that we have sampled in a way that is not independent of exposure, right? So it's something you want to pay close. I think that's one of the most important decisions you make in a case control study, which is, how do I sample in a way that is independent? So how to do it practically is look at where you are trying to select cases, right? Or sorry, trying to select controls. So for example, if I'm trying to select controls, say in a spa as my control, my next question is there an association between going to the spa and receiving cancer treatment, right? if I find out that, well, people who go to the spa are more likely to have just received some cancer treatment, well, that means that there's an association between where I'm trying to select controls and the exposure. So the bottom line, what we're trying to say is that where you are selecting controls should not be in a manner or an environment that is somehow linked to your exposure variable. For better or for worse, it should not be associated in any way. Because it is only then that you can look back and say, oh, wow, I can see that the controls differ from the cases in the fact that they were exposed to this while these ones were not exposed to that. But if you are already selecting in a way that is, for better or for worse, linked to the exposure, then that undermines the very purpose of doing a case control study. So the moral of the story is you've decided that you're going to select so and so controls from this area. Just make sure that there is no association, at least to the extent that you can draw between that exposure and the place you're trying to recruit controls from. All right. Any other questions?
Yes, Prof. How do we identify biomarkers for a study? What is the best way to call it? Is it retrospective study or retrospective cohort study? Which one is appropriate?
It seems like that's a very loaded question. There's a question about biomarkers and then there's a question about nomenclature. Is that correct?
Yes, there are two questions.
Well, please don't call any study a retrospective study. There's no study called a retrospective study. A retrospective could be anything. So you can say retrospective cohort study. And please don't say, don't call it a retrospective case control study. It's tautologic. Case control studies by definition are retrospective, right? So if you call it it's like saying how ridiculous is that? It's like saying I can't even think of it's so absurd I can't think of something that comes close to that. If I'm talking to you, the assumption is already that you're alive. You can't talk to a dead person unless you have some serious, mental issues, right? So case control studies by definition are retrospective. So there's no circumstance in which you are warranted saying a retrospective case control study because all case control studies are retrospective. So when they're called, the reason why we say retrospective cohort is because there's another type of cohort called prospective. So adding retrospective makes sense. Saying that same thing to case control studies does not make sense because there's only one type of case control. They are all retrospective. Regarding the biomarker part of your question, I'm not sure exactly what the question is asking, but a biomarker in of itself does not qualify a study as prospective or retrospective. You can have biomarkers in retrospective studies. You can also have biomarkers in prospective studies. You can also have biomarkers in cross-sectional studies. We just talked about ENHANCE a few weeks ago. ENHANCE is a cross-sectional study where we also take biomarkers. So biomarkers in of themselves are not a very helpful metric to determine whether the study is cross-sectional or cohort or prospective or retrospective.
Thank you. In a 1 to 4 case control selection, can we select one case and then 4 controls concurrently? If we select cases only until we fill our sample, then we continue to controls either way, effect or which one is correct for recruitment procedures.
You can do it however you want. And in certain designs, that decision is already made for you. For example, if you're doing a nested case control study, all the cases have already occurred, right? And so you are now selecting controls for that, right? It's all depending on these are just logistics of the study, but whatever you do is fine. Just have to be very clear in communicating how you're doing it in your protocol.
Thanks. Traditionally, we use blood donors as controls. What are your comments on this?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question. We use what?
Blood donors.
Blood donors as what controls?
as controls.
Controls for
Titilola,
what?
okay, that's your question.
So
Her hand is up. So.
okay, already. Go ahead, please.
Titilola.
Very much. So I was just going to ask, traditionally we use quite a number of times, we use blood donors as controls when we believe that, oh, they are seemingly normal and they will not. What's your comment on this moving forward for me?
My comment is that we should never ever come to a scenario where we put rules of thumb for selection of anything. It's an extremely dangerous move from a study design perspective.
Thank you.
But blood donors might be fine for one scenario, but maybe the worst group in another scenario, right? So yes, no, let's not impose rules of thumb like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Diana, that's a long question. Are you sure you don't want to speak? Please raise your hand. All right. You may speak.
Okay. So my question is, at our hospital, we deliver on average about 400 babies per month, and we lose about 8 of them to sepsis. And from our reviews, sepsis is a theme. And then we noticed we are suspecting post-birth practices. And one of the practices we are suspecting is bathing the children in water. A practice I think in Uganda, they call it a chogero. It's a practice common among the Baganda, where they bathe children in herbs. But unfortunately, this water is not changed, it's not refilled, so they can bathe them up to 2 weeks. So we are thinking of doing a case control study to find out if maybe this is what is causing the sepsis. And we wanted to match based on delivery status, whether the baby was delivered through SVD or CS, and then the breastfeeding practices, whether it's EBF or something else, and then whether the baby was born at term or preterm. So I'm thinking, is a case control appropriate? Over to you.
Yeah, you could use a case control. In that case, the child who died is matched to. So if you're just trying to assess factors who associated with development of sepsis, then you would say the case is a child who has developed sepsis, and the child is the control will be a child that has similar characteristics as that one, but did not develop sepsis, right? And then you can look back to see, okay, what were the difference between them. You can also choose to make your outcome to be the death, right? Children who died from sepsis. So you could have a very broad definition where you include as cases children who have sepsis and are still living, or those who died. Of course, with those who died, that introduces a new layer of complexity because, yeah, especially if you want to get some biomarkers, for example, it becomes very hard then. But in general, yes, a case control study will be appropriate for that.
Thanks, Prof. I think I missed one question. Halima, you asked a question. Okay, sorry, before I get to I'm still looking for your question, Halima. If you can, please repost it. Types of case control studies, meaning of, okay, this is a question. What are the types of case control studies? And what is the meaning of nested case control study?
Okay. The different types of case control studies based on how we select the controls. The most common ones we use in practice are a case cohort and a nested case control. Nested, whenever you hear the word nested, it means think of what's the most common thing that is nested in nature. Think of an onion bulb. See how they are nested inside each other. So that's what nesting means, right? Or think of a nest. That's the most obvious word for a nesting. You have a nest, you have the nest, and then you have the egg inside the nest. That's what nesting means. In a nested case control study, we have something inside something, just like you have an egg inside a nest. So you have a case control study inside a cohort study, right? So let's look at it this way. We started a cohort study, we collect biomarkers, and we're comparing exposed and unexposed over time. And then maybe something happened. The study ended. We have a whole bunch of blood samples we took from participants. And then we have this new issue that we want to investigate. We have a new outcome that is, and we're now interested, maybe down the lane, down the road, people are developing this new cancer that we don't even know of, right? It's a new condition that we did not even plan for when we're designing the study. But we know that we have the blood samples of all these individuals in our fridge or refrigerator. And we know that we have the cases. The question is, what is different? What is causing this thing? So our plan is to select individuals who are cases from this cohort, this original cohort we had, right? Maybe there was a cohort of 10,000 people. Of this 10,000 people, we have 200 of them or 100 of them have developed that cancer that we don't know what's causing it. So it's nested because in that same cohort, we select controls from that same cohort, right? The cases came from the cohort. Remember that we did not set out to design a cohort case control study. We started off as a cohort study, following people over time, many, many years down the line. We now have this new outcome. And so we're going back, selecting controls from that same cohort. And now we're going to start exploring, what exposures, what is different between these cases and the controls. Maybe we have already collected blood samples. We have to get consent and say, hey, Mr. Ethics Board, we want to explore for some other things that we did not include in the original ethics clearance. And we'll now review, maybe we'll pass new questionnaires to these people, and we'll now find, oh wow, this new cancer, these are the exposures that are predictive of it, right? So that's what a nested case control study is. It's called such because we're nesting a case control study in a study that was originally designed as a cohort study. But it's still retrospective because remember, we're still going back in time to be able to identify the exposures that led us. So even though the original study was prospective, the nested case control study in it is by definition retrospective because we're still going back in time to say, what's the difference between these individuals who have cancer and those who don't? A nested case control study is, it's the limitations of it is that we can only look at one outcome at a time, right? Because for each individual case, we might be matching individuals to that case. That based on it, of course, it's one case, right? One diagnosis. But sometimes we're interested in looking at multiple outcomes, not just one outcome, all right? And that's where the case cohort comes from. In the case cohort study, it's designed primarily to allow us to be able to explore multiple outcomes. So the design of a case cohort is that it's called case cohort because some aspects of it behave like a cohort study. So imagine we have a whole bunch of, let's say 1,000 people. And so that 1,000 people, we know already that we are poor and broke. We don't have the resources to examine all these people, right? So what we do is that at the beginning of the study, we draw a random sample of 100 people, for example. Those 100 people are going to be our controls, right? And then when that time pass, right? At the beginning, remember at the beginning, nobody has the disease yet, any of the outcomes of interest yet. That's how it's similar to a cohort. That's what we call the case cohort, because some aspects of it behave like a cohort study. So we have 1,000 people. We don't have the resources to follow this 1,000 people. So we draw a random sample of 100 people at the beginning before anybody has developed the outcome. And then we'll let time do its thing. And then down the line, we have some people develop the outcome, right? what we now do is that we select the cases. Everybody who developed the outcome is now a case. The controls, however, are those initial random sample of people we drew. Those form our controls, right? And so it allows us to be able to examine multiple outcomes. Now, those are the two most common aspects or designs of case control studies used. There are a whole bunch of others, but yeah, we'll maybe focus on another time. Case control is a very broad design in epidemiology. But those two, if you notice, if you're very familiar with those two, that should be enough for you to do most things that you want to do in study design or in practice. All right, any other questions?
Yes, Prof. The role of blinding in case control studies.
Okay, I think we alluded to that already. We said you want to avoid ascertainment bias. So if you're sending eye shots to the doctor, don't tell the doctor that this is our case or this is the case, right? Don't tell the people who are going to ascertain. In a case control study, you must always make plans to confirm that the case is a case and that the control is a control. You don't just look at them and say, I know you are a case, or I know you're a control. No. There has to be an empirical way to verify that the case is a case and that the control is a control. That the case has the condition and the control does not have the condition. So you are ruling in or ruling out. So for the cases, we want to rule in that indeed this person has this condition. And for the controls, we want to rule out that the person indeed does not have this condition. Well, so the point of what we're trying to say is that don't tell the doctors or the people doing the investigation or anybody in contact with the patients whether they're a case or a control. In some cases, it's very hard, as you can imagine, in case control studies to absolutely blind everybody. If your condition is, let's say oral cancer, right? And this guy comes with a swollen jaw. Obviously, everybody knows that this is a case already. You don't have to, even if you did not put it on paper, it's obvious, it's self-evident that this is the case. So that's one of the challenges that arise with regards to blinding in case control studies, because it's an observational study. Sometimes it is impossible to blind. We may not tell them that they are a case, but everybody can see with their eyes that this individual is clearly a case. So that's one of the challenges and limitations of case control studies.
Thank you, Prof. Last question. In retrospective cohort study, some individuals use only one group, which is the exposure group. Is that right?
A cohort study in epidemiology has exposed and unexposed. If you don't have an exposed and unexposed, it's not a cohort study. People use the term, however, colloquial. If you in the English language, the English language meaning of cohort is quite different from the epidemiologic meaning of it, right? So in the English language, a cohort is just a group of people, like one happy group of people. In epidemiology, that's not the case. That's not the context. It means exposed and non-exposed. So if you have one population, you have to still figure out a way to distinguish exposed and non-exposed, right? So let's say that I'm trying to do a study of ChatGPT usage. So let's say my research question is the use of ChatGPT associated with changes in academic performance? And I'm trying to design that as a retrospective cohort. I could go back in time. Let's say that I want to include as my cohort all first-year students who were enrolled at Harvard, let's say in 4 years ago, right? That's my cohort. So I'm going back in time and I'm trying to look at some records to determine whether or not they use ChatGPT, or whether there was some evidence of their usage of ChatGPT. So even though it's one group that I'm studying, I have to figure out a way to discriminate between the exposed and non-exposed as of that time, and then follow them. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that whether the group existed as two separate groups of exposed or non-exposed, or whether it's one group that you have to do the job of distinguishing who was exposed versus not exposed based on what you are defined as exposure, that's something that you have to do.
Thank you, Prof. And one of the most frequently asked questions, can the Chisquares software be used for experimental data analysis, for example, agricultural experiments?
Yes, you can. You can use the Chisquares platform for everything.
Right,
You
Prof.
expect the longer answer, weren't you?
Pardon?
You were expecting the longer answer, it appears.
No.
Okay.
Not for this one.
Oh, okay, all righty.
Yeah, there are no more questions. People are just asking for your contact details.
Okay, well, you can always, contact me on LinkedIn, and I think I do a fair job of responding quickly.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Prof.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too. Someone's raising their hand. Prof is gone. Sorry.